Now let's go ahead and take a look at the Schlage Primus patented keyway system here. It is the added complexity to this system that makes it so secure. You can see this is a standard Schlage Classic keyway with only one shear line of pins at the top. 6 pins make up one singular shear line. This is the next grade up. This would be the Schlage Everest 29 keyway. It involves an extra check pin and a different key blank than the standard Schlage SC. However, it doesn't offer anywhere near the complexity as Schlage Primus. Schlage Primus offers a completely separate, independent shear line from the sidebar and the top pins. So we're going to take a look at this cylinder and start pulling it apart by taking the back cam screw off. This cutaway provides an excellent example of how this lock actually works. From this angle, it looks like a conventional pin tumbler lock. However, on this side, you can see how the finger pins engage with the sidebar, and then how the finger pins engage with the side milling that is on the key blank itself. Here we have the sidebar removed, and you have these sidebar springs, very tiny little springs, very easy to lose, so very important to make sure you keep track of all of those. Now, as long as the key blank stays inserted, the finger pins will stay in place. If you need to change the finger pin arrangement, you will have to remove the key blank slowly, one by one, and release each one of the pins and springs for the finger pins, as you can see here. When you're reloading and rebuilding the cylinder, you want to put the spring in first and then put the finger pin in second, and go ahead and install the key to hold and trap it in place. You can see how these tiny little parts make this such an ultra complex lock. Here you can see the underside of one of those finger pins, and you can see how the finger pins engage with the sidebar itself. This is a demo model, so you can actually see that they have the sidebar and a finger pin encased in acrylic, so you can understand how the system works. When rebuilding this cutaway lock cylinder, you'll have to trap one of the top pins, just like you would rebuilding a conventional cylinder, using the follower and a set of tweezers. Here we've got the plug fully removed and all of the parts taken out of the plug as well. It's been fully field stripped. Primus is very proud of their lock, so you will always recognize the big Primus stamped right on the face of the lock cylinder. Here we have the housing or the Bible of the lock completely stripped and field stripped as well, so we can begin servicing this lock and putting it back together, and you can see all of those tiny little parts on the pinning tray here. Beginning to rebuild the cylinder, start with the top spring and the follower and rebuild as you would a conventional lock. As far as the finger pins go, those get rebuilt through the cylinder itself, as you can see here. Now let's watch the whole thing from start to finish. Alrighty, we are going to be taking a look at this really awesome cutaway Schlage Primus lock. We're actually going to see how this thing comes apart, what makes it tick, and all of the moving parts and pieces inside here. This is an ultra complex lock that has a significant amount of moving parts when compared to the average pin tumbler lock. First of all, we go ahead and undo the Phillips head screw that holds on the tailpiece or the drive cam. Then we insert the key, rotate 90 degrees, making sure that the cutaway portion does not go towards the top where the pins are. Then we pull out the sidebar. This is what makes it more complex than a typical average lock. We've got 2 springs that hold that sidebar up and away until the finger pins meet the shear line. So there is a secondary shear line. We have the typical shear line of the average pin tumbler lock, and then you also have these finger pins on the side that interact and engage with the side milling on the key itself. And that's some of the differences between Schlage Primus and Schlage Everest. Everest only has a check pin in the back in most cases. Schlage Primus has all cuts. I believe there's 5 different cuts for the finger pins. And then the finger pins come out. When they're all lined up correctly, the sidebar is allowed to fall into that void, and you meet your secondary shear line. That's what makes these extremely difficult to pick. I do believe that there have been some videos out there. However, running into one of these locks out in the wild and actually being able to pick it would be a completely different thing, I personally believe. Now we're going to rebuild the lock cylinder. We've removed the top pins and the springs, and I'm now rebuilding it and inserting those back in. Now we're going to take a look at that sidebar. This is what makes the lock very, very, very pick resistant, and to where you have to have specialized key blanks with that custom side milling to actually open them. Now we're going to put the finger pin springs back in their position, and the finger pin as well. With Schlage Primus, the cuts coincide with the depth of the finger pins, so the sidebar pattern doesn't change. The pins and the way they engage with the key, much like they engage with the cuts on the top of the key, these engage with the cuts on the side of the key. And a tip for rekeying, it helps to hold the finger pins in place, because they're going to try and dump out of there, and then they're going to try and jump out when you try and load the key pins in as well. However, if you insert the key and engage the finger pins in the side milling, then it holds it in place so you can continue to put springs and load the finger pins in their place. Now you can begin to see the added complexity of this lock with all of the additional springs, the additional pins, the additional milling in the side of the key. It definitely is a significant step above a conventional pin tumbler lock. Finishing loading the rest of those finger pins in place. And then we take a look at the finger pins, making sure that they line up in the center for the sidebar, allowing the sidebar to fall into that particular void. And the springs hold the sidebar out until it lines up, and then you put rotation on the plug and the sidebar collapses into the plug. Now we load the key pins back in their place, and be ultra careful to slide the plug in correctly and put the last screw in along with the tailpiece or drive cam. And now you have successfully rekeyed or taken apart and reassembled the Schlage Primus and all of its wonderful moving parts.